Hi folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. Someone's going to point out that I have a squeaky belt, and you're correct, I do. It started squeaking a few days ago, and I have a replacement. I've figured out it is just the belt, and it's going to get fixed. Don't worry about it. Just kind of ignore it. Just pretend like it's the crunch from the mornings, okay? I decided to do this kind of video as opposed to the sometimes typical news video in the afternoon because, well, we all know that things are just, you know, it's circling the big porcelain bowl, right, as it's going down. And we're seeing it on a daily basis. And today with the election day, who knows how it's going to turn out. There's all kinds of reports of malfunctions and seeing reports of certain cities boarding up windows in anticipation for whatever, and we're all aware of that kind of stuff, or at least you should be. You kind of have a good idea. So what I wanted to talk to you about is something that I've talked in the past, and I feel it's just, well, we just need to talk about it some more, and that is how bad it could potentially get and why we need each other and why we need to develop those relationships and those trust, that level of trust with each other, because it's so important. The world is, it's just teetering, okay? And some of you think that it's teetering and it may come back and we may be able to rebuild and make America and everything else great again. And some of you have accepted and believe that we are seeing the end of days, so to speak. Some level of collapse, whether it's biblical end collapse or if it's just the collapse of a, you know, prominent society and nation so that the next one can rise up and take over. Either way, a lot of you believe that that's kind of what's happening. And if that does happen, I think things will be much worse than the average American can even fathom. We live in such an isolated, insulated kind of reality. And that's not putting us down. When I've said that before, or things like that, or that Americans are generally, because of this, a little weaker when it comes to, you know, dealing with a world like that, it upsets people. And I can't apologize for it. It's a fact. When you look around at the world and how things have gone in places around this world for the last few decades, Americans have it pretty good. I believe I was watching a video not too long ago from Warren Buffett, and I'm not saying I like the guy or anything, but he did make a good point. He was talking about the town that he lives in and this middle-class neighborhood. He said this is a neighborhood where people, you know, they send their kids are going to public schools. They're not in private, you know, schools. It's not a gated community. You know, these are just middle-class working families. He said, and what we don't realize is that each one of those families in that neighborhood live a better life, a more luxurious life than the Rockefellers did 120 years ago. Back in the late 1800s into the turn of the 1900s. He said they live a better life. You know, they have air conditioning everywhere. They have technology that does so much. They have information at their fingertips. They can have food delivered to, you know, right to their door, anything they want. They can, excuse me, tickle in my throat. They can go to the store and have their pick of any kind of foods from all over the world. The average American lives a better life than millionaires did 100 years ago. We live a very comfortable existence. And so when everything starts collapsing down upon us, that's why I and many of you believe it could be much worse here in the United States than elsewhere. Take, for instance, let's just pick on them and say any West African country, you know, the Horn of Africa, the places that's not been doing too good for for the last few years. If any one of those governments completely collapse, are the regular people really going to feel a whole lot of difference? I mean, they're probably going to notice some things change. They're going to notice, you know, probably a little less food, a little less water, a little less, you know, energy and stuff like that if they went through a big collapse. But they already live in a very poor, poverty-stricken status where they're already struggling just to survive. And this is true around a lot of the world. Eastern Europe, most of Eastern Europe, while they may be living a better lifestyle than a lot of the countries on the eastern horn of Africa, they have also experienced a lot of violence and turmoil over the last few decades, from the fall of Russia, you know, the communist, the Soviet Union. I'll spit it out here in a second. They dealt with a lot of turmoil and a lot of collapse, a lot of bad things. So if they experienced it again, there's enough people that's still alive from that they know what to expect. They know how to handle it a little bit better. Even Western Europe, while they didn't go through a Soviet Union collapse, they've gone through a massive world war on their soil. And so there's still enough people that kind of understand what it's like. Whereas here in America, you know, in the last couple of 100 years, the worst things that's really happened was the Civil War that affected a lot of lives, and the market crash, Great Depression / Dust Bowls, because that kind of all happened kind of together. But since then, aside from people going off to war, here in the homeland, it's been really good, really easy. And so the things that could potentially happen, I'm not saying they definitely will, but the things that could potentially happen are going to be so great and could cause us to fall much further and much harder than most other places around the world. Now, of course, there's a lot of you that say, well, you have to factor in that there's the government there, bigger government, more money, more infrastructure, more stuff to kind of catch that fall. And it's possible, because that's what certainly happened in the past. Look at, 2008, that whole, crash and everything. That's what happened then. The government, the Fed, everyone stepped in, bailed a bunch of people out, and averted a big disaster. But what we have happening right now is really far worse than that. It's affecting every segment and sector of American life, all the way down to the very basic foundations of our family structure and moral traditions, and everything is being affected. And so the possibility of something being far greater and far worse is real. And I don't think most Americans understand that. Some of you, maybe you've immigrated here from one of these places, and as a child growing up, or even as an adult, you saw firsthand what it was like. I get a lot of you that fall into that category emailing me and telling me, I grew up in Cuba, or I grew up in Bosnia, or all these other places, and I grew up in Venezuela, and now that I'm here and I see America going down the same path as these other countries went, and it scares me, because I know what's going to happen, and it's bad. Some of you have served in combat in certain places around the world, or have served in just service, in seeing what some of these countries are like, and so you have a good idea. But the vast majority of Americans don't. And even though you may be prepping, you may be homesteading, whatever it is that you call it, you need to start to wrap your head around the reality of how bad, really how bad things are, and how bad they could get. Because I think it's going to shock a lot of people. A lot of the little things that we concern ourselves with, the little things that we complain about, the little bickerings and problems that we have amongst ourselves, are really not going to mean a whole lot when it all starts falling apart. And so that's why it's so important to not just your physical preps, but also mentally, of course spiritually. I mean, that's always top of the list. But that psychological preparedness is going to be so critical, because there's such a increased, and it's increasing possibility that in our lifetime, my lifetime, most of your lifetimes, and certainly our children's lifetimes, that we could see a world that absolutely looks nothing like what we've lived in. It could be really desolate and reminiscent of one of these apocalyptic movies that we've seen, or it could be so intrusive and Big Brother and dystopian that, again, it looks like some of these apocalyptic movies that many of us have seen. And I just think that a lot of times we don't wrap our heads around that. Maybe it's possible that some of you don't do that and really try to fully understand it, because there's this fear that builds in you, that you're terrified of a world like that. And while it's certainly something to be worried about, and even a little fear, remember that a lot of that is based on because it's such a drastic change to what you're used to. It's not so much that you can't survive it. You can, and definitely there will be people that won't survive it, but you can survive it. History has proven that every society that's gone through something like this, in some form, some great war, or some great economic or social collapse or whatever, or just collapse of government, people survive. In fact, the majority of people survive. And while there's certainly odds against us because of these globalists that want to rule and depopulate and all the kind of stuff that they want to do, we can still survive. And again, I stand by that one of the best ways to survive that is by building community and connections with each other. And that's going to look different for all of you. I'm not here to tell you how to do it necessarily. I'm not here to tell you that it should be done one way or the other. It just needs to be done. And it needs to be done sooner or later. Me personally, when I look into what I'm looking for other people to personally connect with and personally be part of more of that inner circle, and there's different layers to that inner circle, but I'm looking for someone that has that real strong moral character, that someone that you can count on, someone that's trustworthy, someone that's honest, someone that's is an example of how we should live our lives right now. Someone that their word means something to them, and they're not gonna back down on it. Something my wife and I have talked about, and this is specifically for men, but you could say this about women too. How do they treat their spouse? What kind of relationship do they have? How do they treat their kids? How do they treat the people around them? Those are some things that I'm looking at on who I want to be part of my inner circle. Now, again, I said that there's layers. So there's going to be people that they may not qualify to be in that inner circle, but they certainly would qualify to be in more of the outer circles that there's just connections. If there's someone that may live down the road from you or in your area, and you don't agree with them on certain things, or you don't like this about them, but maybe this is okay, or whatever it is, but yet they have a skill that is needed. It's a skill that you can, that you need to use, and maybe you have something that you can trade and barter. Establishing relationships with people like that now is also good. They may not be your inner circle. You may not invite them over and show them all the stuff that you have and tell them about your plans, but developing a relationship now with them so that you can barter and trade, help each other, mutually beneficial relationship later on is going to be important. This is the kind of stuff we have to be thinking about. I know we get caught up in the news, the wars, the famines, the shortages, the inflation, the fuel, the elections, and all that kind of stuff. It's all important to keep track of. But don't lose sight of the things that we need to be doing. obviously the preps, but also the relationships, also establishing who is friend and foe, and then understanding that there's different layers to that, and that's okay. That's okay. Not everybody is going to be the kind of person that you'd go help bury a body for. I mean, there may only be a small few amount of people that fall into that. You know, for me personally, it's a tiny few, and then you work out from there. This is all going to become critical at some point. The world is rapidly changing, and we have to be serious about these things, because regardless of who gets elected into office, in the end, they don't really have your best interest at heart. I believe that. You can disagree with me if you want, that's fine. But they have their agenda, their party, their sponsors' agenda at heart. And the things that's been set into motion already, I don't even know if it's possible to stop them at this point without some kind of miraculous intervention. So we've got to be serious about this and come to the realization that the world ahead of us could be a very strange, dark, and chaotic place. And we have to be serious about the things that we are doing to prepare, because I think most Americans are just, they're not mentally in that space to accept a world like that. And that alone is going to cause so many problems. And we have to be ready for that. Folks, it's time now more than ever to get your houses in order and prepare yourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.